In the Florida Panhandle, a young passerby discovers a killer's dumping ground. A metal chain may be a link to a victim's final hours. But investigators must first confirm the identity from the charred bones if they ever hope to solve the brutal crime.
Jackie!
An idyllic backyard in rural Tennessee becomes the backdrop for the unthinkable.
Jackie!
A little girl disappears in broad daylight.
Tell me which one.
With every passing hour, police lose hope of ever seeing her alive.
This one?
But before detectives can prove murder, they must find her body. Some killers choose to hide their victims. And investigators must then rely on forensic examiners to uncover proof of murder. These are just two extraordinary crimes that have made their way into the medical examiner's casebook. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. The Gulf Coast of the Florida Panhandle is known for its quiet beaches and peaceful living. But on March 4th, 1999, Okaloosa County's tranquil lifestyle was threatened. That afternoon, investigator Stan Griggs of the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office was called to an isolated wooded area. Children discovered a body while playing in the woods. Panicked, a young mother phoned police. In his 15 years with the department, Griggs had never seen anything like it.
There was a charred body that was secured to a tree with chains and rope. We actually could not tell definitively if it was male or female.
The investigators scoured the scene for clues, looking for anything that would tell them who this person was and why he or she died so violently. Although the crime scene was littered with debris, physical clues were scarce.
There wasn't a lot of evidence around the body. A few cans, a roll of duct tape, a couple items of clothing. We didn't find anything that would lead toward the identification of the victim, much less any perpetrators.
The victim's hands were bound with a blood-stained cord, and duct tape was stretched across what remained of the skull. Fragmented bones and tattered clothing were charred beyond recognition. It appeared the victim had been dead for quite some time.
There was insect activity, an insect activity that indicated that whoever perpetrated this made more than one visit.
The body showed evidence of maggots, a process that normally takes 2 weeks. But the finding posed more questions than it answered. The insects were burned just like the body. Forensic specialist Jan Johnson took samples.
It was a puzzle. We couldn't figure out why someone would come back, obviously, a couple of weeks after the person had died, to burn the body.
Dr. Michael Birkland, Chief Deputy Medical Examiner for the district, carefully prepared to recover the remains.
We were very intent on getting the body removed exactly the way it was pretty much positioned at the scene because of an injury that I identified to the neck region. That was going to be very important to keep the neck in that position until we got back and were able to x-ray.
The remains were taken to the morgue for autopsy. Evidence collected at the scene was transferred to the Forensic Science Unit at the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. None of the items found at the crime scene produced anything concrete. authorities were no closer to identifying the victim or the killer. After examination, it was determined the victim was an adult male, less than 6 feet tall. Establishing cause of death would fall to Dr. Michael Birkland.
When we got the body back, we went ahead and did x-rays looking for any projectiles or foreign bodies, and we did not see any evidence that this represented either a gunshot wound case, or there were no foreign knife tips or anything like that left in the body. The x-rays showed a number of fractures to the body of the upper extremities, what we call defense injuries, where the arms had been put up to try to ward off blows. There were a number of skull fractures that caused extensive fracturing of the base of the skull.
Dr. Birkland believed the victim was killed by a blunt force trauma to the neck. The autopsy report documented a brutal murder, and it also helped establish a sequence of events.
If you're transporting a dead body to what we would consider a secondary dump site, there's no need to bind it, gag it, and chain it to a tree. So it was common sense that told us that the body was probably transported there initially live, may have already indeed been injured, because this was a fairly stocky person, and so without subduing him somehow, I would have thought you would have put up a considerable fight, and certainly you would not have to chain a dead person to the tree.
But Dr. Birkland was still puzzled by the insects. There were several populations of maggots present in the body. He concluded from their numbers and their size that the victim had been dead about a month.
The most startling revelation was that there was charred maggots, indicating that the maggots had been there for a while, grown up a little bit, and then somebody came back and set the fire. For the investigation, that meant that whoever had brought the body there had came back to the scene again.
Fingerprinting the victim was difficult. His hands had been damaged by fire. But there was enough soft tissue on the right thumb to make an impression.
Given that one of his fingers was not badly involved in the charring process, we were able to find enough minutia and ridge detail. So we were able to have sufficient information from that one finger to attempt a match.
While the prints were sent for comparison to the Florida Crime Lab, investigator Griggs was determined to learn the identity of the victim. The autopsy established the victim died sometime around the 1st of February. Investigator Griggs began checking missing persons reports.
We send out a bulletin over to law enforcement net that we have found the body, and asking for any kind of missing persons information other agencies may have.
One stood out as a strong possibility. A local restaurant worker was reported missing on February 13, 1999.
Okay, get right on. Thank you, sir.
Cordell Richards was a 32-year-old male of Asian descent. The last time anyone saw him was around the 3rd.
We checked with the Fort Walton Beach Police Department, and they told us a friend had reported Cordell Richards missing. They naturally went to the apartment to check on his welfare. There they found young people who claimed that they didn't know where he was.
I'm alright, honey.
Oh, pretty good. I'm looking for Cordell. Does he live there?
A young
He does
student named Crystal Maestas rented a room from Cordell.
Seen Cordell in about 10 days.
17-year-old Ron Bell was her boyfriend.
Who are you, sir?
The two teenagers confirmed Cordell left in early February, but they didn't know why.
I'm in the room.
Oh, okay. Is there anybody else in the house?
Just us two now.
You mind if I take a look?
Good.
Sir, could you have a seat over here?
Ron Bell and Crystal Maestas stuck with a story that Cordell Richards just disappeared after receiving some unknown type of court papers. He piled up some black bags in the apartment, and the next day he was gone along with the black bags. They never saw him again.
What's your first name?
Crystal.
Crystal, could you do me a favor?
The teenager's story seemed
Could
suspicious.
you give me a call and let me know?
Sure.
Okay, here's my card. All my information's on the card. Okay.
Detective Griggs decided to interview the friend that reported Cordell Richards missing.
Let's have a seat right there. I understand that you're the one that reported Cordell Richards missing.
Yes, correct.
Okay, you're a friend of his?
Yeah, we've known each other for about a year and a half.
Okay.
According to his friend, Cordell Richards was a good man.
So, Grandpa, you look like you're good enough to go play some golf later, huh?
He was especially close to his grandparents, spending a lot of time with them since his grandfather had fallen ill. Cordell was divorced with 2 small children.
Thank you so much.
He worked at 2 jobs in order to support his family.
Everybody I talked to about Cordell Richards told me what a responsible person he was, a hard-working person. He worked several jobs, and his bosses always considered him highly reliable.
Investigators finally believed they were about to put a name on the victim that had remained anonymous for all these weeks. The name was Cordell Richards. In Okaloosa County, Florida, investigators struggled to identify a body that was not much more than a skeleton. The victim was badly burned and chained to a tree. After checking missing persons reports, the sheriff's department uncovered a possible match. Forensic specialist Jan Johnson worked to identify the body using a single thumbprint.
This body was extremely decomposed and burned, and I was very shocked to find that there was still enough friction-rich detail to affect an identification. The fingerprints did match the fingerprints of the unidentified deceased, which was the skeletal remains of Cordell Richards. Investigator Griggs, this is
Fingerprints
Jan
confirmed it.
Johnson.
Cordell Richards was no longer a missing person. He was a murder victim.
That is correct.
Investigators returned to the Fort Walton Beach apartment complex where Cordell Richards had lived.
How you doing?
Hi.
Stan Griggs with the Sheriff's Office. Can we speak to you for a minute?
Sure.
Can we come on in?
Yeah.
Crystal Maestas answered the door.
What's going on?
I need to ask you a few questions about Cordell Richards.
Yeah, I rent a room for me.
We do? Which room?
The one right there.
Okay.
Forensic specialist Jan Johnson analyzed the apartment.
Okay, we have a search warrant for this apartment. Okay? Because we're trying to locate Mr. Richards. Okay? Here, why don't you look it over?
Okay, just
If you want to step outside, yes, ma'am. It was sparse, but there were some items left behind that, to me, the average person wouldn't leave behind. I knew Cordell Richards exclusively rode a bicycle. He didn't drive. A bicycle was there.
It was a small but important clue. Griggs wondered if Cordell was taken from his apartment by force.
A visual examination did not detect any blood evidence, so we decided to use luminol. Luminol is a presumptive test which is used on trace amounts of blood or blood that's been cleaned up. We sprayed the apartment, and there were 8 areas that did give a positive reaction for blood. We've got a medium velocity spatter pattern here, it looks like. Also, a couple of transfer stains. Looks like partial hand impressions. After I documented the blood spatter, I then swabbed those areas, and those swabbings were sent to our laboratory for DNA analysis, and the blood came back as being conclusive as that of Cordell Richards.
Back in the lab, Johnson tested her theory of how the spatter got onto the wall. Using blood-soaked sponges and paper targets, she reproduced medium velocity spatter.
Medium velocity spatter is 1 millimeter to 3 millimeters in diameter and normally is associated with forceful impacts from blunt force trauma.
Okay, thank you.
They now had proof Cordell Richards was brutally beaten in his apartment.
Hey guys.
But in order to find his killer, they needed to find out why.
Have you heard of any robberies, home invasions, or burglaries?
Detectives checked for reported break-ins in the area.
I haven't heard anything like that.
There weren't any. In fact, in recent years, there were very few robberies in the neighborhood.
Okay, thanks. I didn't know why Cordell Richards was killed. We were looking at possible gambling debts, possible debts like he may have owed. That was a possibility. It didn't seem like it was broken in. It was a haphazard thing.
Go through for a second.
Investigators canvassed the neighborhood near where the body was found.
Do you remember anything?
One woman recalled seeing an unfamiliar car parked near the woods about a month before.
Right.
And I noticed two teenagers coming from those woods over there.
Okay.
And
It was a gray hatchback. It had a missing window.
like a compact car, and one of the rear windows was punched out and was broken because there was a black trash bag covering it.
Okay.
The next day, investigators found Ronald Bell and Crystal Maestas as they were about to enter a gray car, matching the witness's description.
This your vehicle?
Yes, sir.
For this? Yes.
Bell confirmed the car belonged to him.
You know Cordell Richards?
Yes, I met him a few times and I've come to pick her up.
Do you know Cordell Richards, man?
Yeah, I rent a room from him.
Okay. What happened to your window on the vehicle?
I had a burglary a couple of weeks ago.
Evidence was mounting. Both teenagers knew Cordell Richards. Bell's car was spotted near the crime scene, and the victim's blood was found on the walls of the apartment Crystal shared with him.
I
No.
don't know where it's at.
It was enough to obtain a warrant to search the car. The car was searched and dusted for fingerprints. But no evidence was found connecting the vehicle to the victim. Next, investigators questioned officials at the school Ron Bell attended.
That you already saw in there?
I did note that he was gone from the 2nd to the 5th straight, and then quite a
He
few
was
days
absent
in the
several
middle of the
days in early
month.
February.
An unusual pattern for
Is
him.
it?
Come on in.
Ted Mazzo, a fellow student, confirmed Ronald Bell borrowed his truck twice during that time.
Let's see. You don't mind any answering any questions or anything I have today?
No, sir.
But Mazzo was not the only person to have information on Bell.
So, what can you tell me about Cordell Richards? He told us that Ron Bell asked him to decipher the password on a computer. He described the computer to me. He also described the layout of the interior of Cordell Richards' apartment.
How hard can it be?
Ron and Crystal were trying to log onto the internet, but they couldn't get past the password.
You're useless, Michael. You're useless.
They asked Paul Martin to hack in.
Can't you get a ride home or
Just
something?
try something else.
Yeah, you gotta help us with some bags.
Just keep working on that until we get there.
Paul noticed that all the files on the computer belonged to someone named Cordell.
Mike, it's not gonna work. Let's go.
He also said that Ron Bell disposed of some property from the apartment and some dumpsters. We searched dumpsters up and down the area, didn't find anything. Of course, by this time it had been a couple months. We just had hopes that maybe something may have fallen out to the side. We did have some fortune where Cordell Richards' identification card was found near a dumpster by some telephone workers.
Although there was a wealth of circumstantial evidence, it wasn't enough.
Hey, Stan.
Yeah. Can you hang on 1 second? Okay, thank you.
I gotta leave.
Without a witness to tie it all together, they couldn't make a case.
Anybody that won't talk to anybody but us.
Okay, be right there. Hey, can I call you right back? Okay, thank you.
On March 17th, investigator Griggs received a startling message. Someone wanted to talk about the murder anonymously. "32-year-old Cordell Richards had been brutally murdered. His body was so badly burned, the medical examiner had trouble establishing the cause of death.
Thank you.
Just as it seemed the case would go cold, investigator Stan Griggs of the Okaloosa Sheriff's Department received a call. The caller was young and terrified. He said he had information about the case, but he only agreed to talk to investigators anonymously. The informant claimed Renee Lynx, a friend of Crystal's, was bragging about the murder.
He told us that Renee Lynx told him that she, Ron Bell, and Crystal Maestas were going to kill a guy because the guy had made advances on Crystal. She and Crystal were going to seduce him. Ron Bell would hit him over the head, knock him out, and they would dispose of his body.
It was a chilling story. Renee Lynx was called into the sheriff's department for questioning. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Renee Lynx admitted she helped Ronald Bell and Crystal Maestas abduct Cordell Richards and chain him to a tree in the woods.
Tie his hands and being kind of...
Despite beating and burning him, Cordell Richards was still alive. They purchased a meat cleaver at a discount store to finish him off.
All right, if you could, just go ahead and stand up, place your hands behind your back, because you're going to be arrested for murder.
Renee Lynx was only 15 years old when she was arrested for murder. Crystal Maestas and her boyfriend, Ronald Bell, were also arrested. Their fate hung on whether or not investigator Griggs could prove they purchased a meat cleaver at a discount store, as Renee Lynx had alleged.
This store has better than average surveillance cameras. We've got video of Ron Bell, Crystal Maestas, and Renee Lynx not only buying the cleaver, but returning it for a refund.
Exactly what I need. I'm gonna have to take that from you.
When you see their faces on the video, this was not a bad happenstance that got out of hand. They're laughing on the video.
Is that the original tape?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Is there any possible way you can trace the new owner of the meat cleaver?
Well, I have to check the bar.
They had records of where 3 cleavers had been returned. One was purchased by a credit card. They checked the inventory numbers and confirmed that that was the cleaver that was in question, the one that was used.
Yeah, that one right there. That one.
Investigators retrieved the meat cleaver as evidence.
Just get it out of here.
You sure you haven't used it?
In the lab, Jan Johnson analyzed the blade for blood. Ultimately, no blood stains were found. They would have to rely on circumstantial evidence and witness testimony to convict the 3 teenagers who purchased the cleaver.
Crystal Maestas gave a very condensed version of the murder of Cordell Richards.
Crystal didn't always get along with her landlord.
Are you guys deaf or something? I can't even hear myself think in there.
Come join us. We saved your seat.
But she also knew Cordell was attracted to her. This made her boyfriend, Ronald Bell, very angry.
Is that seat for me?
He decided to do something about it. He knocked Cordell unconscious with a blunt object.
He was rolled up in a blanket, taken to a place in the western part of our county. He revived. They secured him to a tree. They began beating him with a baseball bat. They take turns hitting him in various parts of his body. He's still moaning. He's unconscious, but he's moaning. And he's starting to revive again. And it's then that Ron Bell pulls out some cigarette lighter fluid, soaks Cordell Richards with it, and lights him on fire. And they come back the next day. Cordell Richards is still alive. He's moaning for help. They go to a nearby department store, buy a meat cleaver, go out there, and they finish him off. I think the whole community was horrified that essentially children this age committed such a crime.
Crystal Maestas was tried and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ronald Bell is also serving a life sentence for his role in the murder. They were both tried as adults. Florida investigators combined science and determination to convict killers who were barely old enough to drive. But in Tennessee, when a child is the victim, a whole community comes together to track down a human predator. Montgomery County, Tennessee is located just 40 miles outside of Nashville. It's a place where life is simple and people feel safe.
Jackie! Jackie!
But on the afternoon of July 8, 1996, Jeannie Meyer learned the meaning of fear.
Jackie!
She was running late. Her son had a dental appointment, and her daughter Jackie was in the backyard picking blackberries.
Jackie! Jackie!
Jeannie's annoyance quickly turned to panic. Her daughter was only 9 years old, and now she was missing.
Jackie!
Can you describe her to me?
She's 9 years old.
Okay.
She had a pink shirt on, and she had her favorite little
The Montgomery
blue
County
pants on,
Sheriff's
her light
Department
blue sweater.
responded.
She wears them all the time. Okay, I have a picture
Jackie
of her.
Beard was 4'7", with
okay?
sandy blonde hair and blue eyes.
Okay.
She was wearing a pink shirt and
She weighed
jeans.
50 pounds. I don't know.
Jeannie tried to think of anything unusual that happened lately.
I have some other ones, but that's really.
She recalled seeing a stranger in the neighborhood.
Hey, good kick.
He was talking to Jackie and her friends.
Around here in the woods or in your playground? Hey, little girl. laying around here. If you just look on the ground, if you see something, you know, about 6 keys on a ring. Oh, yes, ma'am.
The man identified himself as Tommy Robertson, an undercover police officer.
And I lost my keys out here.
He said he'd lost his keys somewhere in the neighborhood.
To see if I could find them, and I saw you.
He wondered if the children had seen them.
If they had seen them around anywhere.
So your name is what again?
Yeah, it's Tommy, ma'am. Tommy Robertson. And I appreciate it if y'all see my keys around here, we're just call the police department.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate
Have a
it.
good day.
They're her favorite shoes. They're her absolute
The Montgomery
favorite.
County police officer reassured Jeannie, more often than not, missing children come home. In the meantime, they would do everything they could to find little Jackie.
All right, and we're going to keep this.
After a quick search of personnel records, investigator Billy Batson discovered there was no Tommy Robertson on the force. The optimism police felt now turned to concern, and every available officer was called in to find the missing girl.
Jackie! Jackie!
In Montgomery County, Tennessee, 9-year-old Jackie Beard was picking blackberries in her backyard.
Jackie!
10 minutes later, she disappeared.
Jackie!
Along with police, Montgomery County Rescue Squad coordinated the massive search effort, dispatching the K-9 unit and community volunteers. They combed the woods, searching for any sign of the missing girl. Billy Batson, an investigator with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Department, tried to remain optimistic.
It's a missing child at this point. We have initiated ground searches, including dogs and people who have volunteered to search the area looking for Jackie. Certainly our hopes were high that we would find her and that she would be safe and close to home.
Using the Myers house as their starting point, investigators fanned out. They searched the woods for hours. And with each passing hour, it seemed more likely that Jackie had been abducted. Children from the neighborhood were called into the sheriff's department and asked about the man posing as a police officer.
Can you look at these here and tell me which one looked close to you?
They gave descriptions of the stranger who called himself Tommy Robertson.
That one will work. This one? Let's capture that.
Feature by feature, a composite photo slowly emerged. In Jackie's neighborhood, the ground search intensified. There was no sign of the child or of the man police now suspected of abducting her. Police went door to door, hoping someone would provide them with any information regarding the little girl's whereabouts.
Hi, yes. How you doing? I'm Detective Shock. This is Officer Wood.
But nothing turned up.
We understand.
Investigators hoped media attention would bring them closer to finding Jackie and the stranger who police believed had taken her from her own backyard.
The next day, after this information had been in the newspaper, we started receiving several phone calls about an individual named Glenn Rogers who matched the description that was given in the paper, and that these people were concerned that he at least needed to be checked out.
Investigator Batson ran a background check. William Glenn Rogers had a long list of felony convictions. Police were dispatched to bring Rogers in for questioning. Rogers claimed that although he was in the Myers neighborhood the day Jackie disappeared, he never saw her. He was only looking for his keys.
Yes.
Police didn't believe him, and the results of a polygraph examination confirmed their suspicions.
No.
It indicated he was lying.
I've been out of work a long time.
Then he came up with a much different story.
Job that day.
He said when he couldn't find his keys, he returned to his car. As he put the car in reverse, he felt a bump, as if he'd hit a tree. Instead, he said he accidentally ran over a little girl, killing her instantly. Rogers panicked. He knew his record would make the accident seem suspicious.
So he didn't know what to do. He got in the car and drove. He came to a bridge which goes over the Cumberland River, not far from that scene, and he got out of the car, went to the passenger side, got Jackie from the car, and threw her over the side of the bridge into the Cumberland River.
Batson, along with Special Agent Brett Murray of the FBI, were more than a little skeptical.
The interview right after the polygraph test, I did not believe. I did believe the fact that he was responsible for her disappearance, which he basically said he was, but the facts surrounding how she disappeared were not something that we believed. We knew there was more to the story. The key then was to try to find Jackie.
Rogers was placed under arrest while investigators checked out his story. The Montgomery County Rescue Squad and surrounding county squads were dispatched to the Cumberland River. They searched for much-needed physical evidence if they hoped to disprove Rogers' story that Jackie's death was an accident.
Glenn Rogers has confessed that he was responsible for Jackie Beard's death, and he said in his statement that he took her body and threw it off the bridge, the Zinc Plant Road that crosses Cumberland River. And at this time we've initiated dragging operations. If in fact that's true, we hope to recover her body.
Despite an exhaustive search, investigators came away empty-handed. There was no sign of Jackie. Police headed back to their only hope, the one person who knew where to find her. That man was Glenn Rogers, and this time they were determined to get to the truth. In Tennessee, a 9-year-old girl had been missing for 3 days. William Glenn Rogers, a convicted felon, claimed he accidentally hit Jackie Beard with his car. He said he panicked, then dumped her body in a river. A search team dragged the Cumberland River, but there was no sign of Jackie Beard's body. Investigators suspected Rogers was lying.
Oh, yeah, let me call you back.
They called his wife in for questioning.
Detective shot. Hi, Mrs. Rogers.
Hello.
She admitted that on the night of July 8th, her husband left the house for several hours.
That's correct. He was about 3 hours late, actually.
His wife remembered the incident because she was angry.
He was so late.
Rogers came home late that night.
Bill, do you know how late it is? Where have you
She noticed he had mud on his pants and a spot of blood on his shirt. The car was muddy too. Rogers made a vague excuse. He said he'd been walking through the woods.
She was waiting for the car to take her grandkids to a school function, so she remembered that. She also indicated that at some point she noticed some small smeared fingerprints on the passenger side of his car on the windshield.
Detective Batson was determined to find out how those tiny fingerprints got there and whether they proved Jackie Beard was still alive when Rogers put her in the car. For that, he needed a closer look at the suspect's car. A forensic team searched every inch of the vehicle. For an older car, it was suspiciously clean. Rogers had done a thorough job of detailing his car. So thorough, there wasn't a shred of evidence that Jackie Beard had ever been inside it.
If there's anything that you want to
Frustrated,
tell us about your
Batson
story,
questioned Rogers about the discrepancies between his statement and his wife's.
Well, now, you know, I've been thinking about this thing. Now, there is something I forgot about.
Rogers quickly changed his story to match hers. Without physical evidence or even a body, the sheriff's department couldn't prove him wrong. 4 months to the day, on November 8th, police in nearby Stewart County received a crucial call. A deer hunter reported seeing human skeletal remains at the Land Between the Lakes Wildlife and Recreation Area.
245 around there, 10-4.
The call was relayed to investigator Batson.
Can you give me a description? The agent in charge down there had heard about this case, and he called me and described to me the clothing that they had found down there, and I knew at that point that it was possibly Jackie.
Investigators and canine units converged on the national park, along with agents of the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. The combined team launched an intensive search to recover the remains. Investigators found a skull. Several strands of sandy blonde hair were still attached. Not far away, they discovered a clump of similar hair. Children's clothing was recovered and bagged as evidence. Dr. Murray Marks led a team of anthropologists from the University of Tennessee in a controlled search and recovery effort.
A crime scene, a forensic scene, is like an archaeological site. There's only one chance to excavate it. The crime scene was in a rural area, heavily wooded, though all the leaves were down. Many times that makes the recovery a little bit more difficult. We found elements scattered in a pretty wide area. And then we systematically go through looking at, for one thing, different layers of leaves. We can tell the seasonality. If the bones are on top of the leaves, obviously, that's happened after they fell. If they're under the leaf or under 2 or 3 layers of leaves, we know how many seasons have gone by. The skeletal remains were under 1 or 2 layers of leaves, so we knew some time had passed.
To learn more, Dr. Marks needed to analyze the skeletal remains. He returned to the forensic anthropology lab at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville.
We knew that we had a subadult individual. Prior to 20 years of age, you can look at dental development and the way the long bones grow and how long they are. So you can make an assessment of age relatively easy. Sex is difficult to ascertain prior to puberty. Prior to puberty, we cannot make an assessment of sex in skeletal remains, so we had no idea we were dealing with a female or a male.
The length of the long bones revealed that the victim was young, between the ages of 7 and 9.
271.
We're going to be interested.
Dr. Marks determined the remains were consistent with the little girls.
Pre-20 years, we're going to look at dental development.
The child had died 3 to 9 months ago, well within the time Jackie Beard disappeared.
We didn't see cut marks that are indicative of sharp force trauma. We didn't see bludgeoning or blunt force trauma, no fracture to bone. We didn't find the fragile bones in the neck that would tell us about strangulation. There was no evidence on the bone that told us anything about a cause or manner of death.
Now, investigators could only hope to make a positive identification.
We also did mitochondrial DNA, comparing the DNA of Jackie with her mother, and that was a match.
Identifying the remains was an important step. But Batson was missing the physical evidence needed to link William Glenn Rogers to the death of Jackie Beard. Once again, science provided answers.
When her clothing was collected, it was sent to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab for further analysis. When they examined the clothing, they found some fibers on Jackie's clothing that they really couldn't identify. Fibers of this type were also found in Glenn Rogers' car.
But they didn't match the car's carpet fibers. Forensic investigators went back to Rogers' house and collected fibers from his carpet. The carpet fibers matched those on Jackie's clothing. Rogers had tracked the fibers into his car. The match conclusively placed Jackie inside the suspect's car.
Did you find your keys?
Hey, little girl. Yeah,
Montgomery County investigators theorized that on July 8, 1996, Glenn Rogers lured 9-year-old Jackie into his car by posing as a trusted figure, a police officer. He then drove to a secluded spot where he raped and killed her. He later hid her body in a secluded area in Land Between the Lakes National Recreation Area. In January of 2000, William Glenn Rogers was convicted of the abduction, rape, and murder of Jackie Beard. At his sentencing hearing, Jackie's mother spoke of her loss.
Jackie looked up to me more than anyone else, and I couldn't do the most important thing I would ever do in my life. I couldn't save her from a horrible situation. I cannot bring myself to imagine what she must have had to go through. My beautiful baby, scared, taken by force, molested, and then killed by a man she thought was a safe person.
William Glenn Rogers was sentenced to death. To cover their tracks, some killers go to great lengths to hide their vicious acts of violence. But in the end, most efforts fail. Forensic science can uncover the smallest clue, because even the most determined killer cannot commit the perfect crime. In the pre-dawn hours, a house catches fire in Wisconsin. Investigators determine that the blaze is a smokescreen designed to hide a more horrific act of violence. But the heat of the flames leaves the crime trail cold. In southern Florida, a series of fires becomes more than a coincidence. People are dying, and a community is frightened. Detectives must work quickly to calm fears and catch the killer before he strikes again. At a crime scene, everything is considered a potential clue. But a fire can destroy everything in its path, challenging forensic investigators at every turn and making each arson a trial by fire. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. "2:30 in the morning, November 25th, 1996. Most of La Crosse, Wisconsin slept. But one of its residents woke up to an alarming sight.
Your neighbor's house is on fire? What's the address there, please?
He noticed smoke pouring from his neighbor's house. Fire trucks raced to the scene. Arriving moments later to find it consumed by flames. If anyone was home, firefighters feared they were trapped inside. La Crosse firefighter Dan Skiles knew he and his men had to get in quickly if they hoped to get anyone out alive. But there appeared to be no way in.
So instead of my normal routine of putting my shoulder into that door and pushing it open, I decided to sit down and use my legs to kick the door open.
Firefighter Skiles kicked open the door and discovered the floor of the kitchen completely destroyed by the fire. With no path to guide them, they relied on each other, making their way through the flames and looking for anyone who was trapped inside.
The person on the nozzle yelled out that he had a victim. We picked him up. I dragged him as far as I could before I ran out of air.
Despite their best efforts, firefighters pulled a man's lifeless body out of the burning rubble. It was the homeowner, 64-year-old Donald Harmasik. And firefighter Dan Skiles suspected something else was wrong.
There was blood on his head, and I thought that was unusual for a victim in a house fire to have any type of blood on him.
It was at that moment firefighters suspected they were dealing with something more than an accident. The body was transported to the morgue for autopsy. La Crosse, Wisconsin detectives Dave Schatzley and Carrie Jaholski interviewed the neighbor who phoned police. And although he saw the flames, he said he did not see or hear anything out of the ordinary. Once the fire department declared the house safe for entry, fire investigators went to work. Deputy Fire Marshal Gene Brink began the preliminary investigation to determine the fire's point of origin.
A fire investigator, in determining the cause of the fire, starts in the area of least damage, the outside of the house or the living room where there was no fire, and works back to the area of most damage.
The house was cluttered with books and magazines. Detectives opened them and found money hidden inside. But the victim's wallet was found empty on the table. As firefighters packed up, Fire Marshal Brink went down to the basement and inspected the debris, looking for some explanation for the blaze.
I want to show you why I'm convinced we had a set fire here. In our investigation, we determined that the fire had started in the basement. That's where the greatest burn had occurred. We found one area under the kitchen where the fire had burned on top of a pile of magazines, where there was no heat-producing device in the area. We had a set fire at that one particular place. This was an arson.
La Crosse arson investigators checked the outside perimeter of the house. They needed to find out who started the fire and why. They noticed a broken basement window Investigators believed whoever started the fire may have entered through that window. In the snow, one of them discovered an undisturbed shoe print leading away from the house. Since it was dark, he covered the print with a metal trash can in order to preserve this possible clue. The autopsy was performed at the Veterans Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. The medical examiner found deep circular wounds in the victim's skull. The force of the blows caused severe hemorrhaging and trauma, rendering him unconscious and unable to escape the fire. Now, along with arson, authorities believed they were also investigating a murder.
Okay, everybody, we want to get a briefing in and get some job assignments.
Early the next morning, at the La Crosse Police Department, investigators compared the information they gathered so far. Detective Joe Dunham was one of the lead investigators on the case.
The coroner thought it was a gunshot, but then he determined later it was a blunt instrument to the head that killed Mr. Harmachek. There's a footprint on the east side of the house in the snow.
Detectives also needed to follow up on the most promising clue so far, the footprint left in the back of the house. At the crime scene, technicians arrived to make a cast of the frozen shoe print. The snow's hardened crystalline structure captured the most intricate detail, but it had to be handled carefully so as not to destroy the print. Before a cast was attempted, the shoe print was photographed just in case. Hot sulfur, which solidifies on contact with the cold snow, was used as the casting medium. The sulfur hardens almost instantly, ensuring the snow does not melt before the cast is created. It recorded every groove and pattern of the shoe print. The newly formed cast was sent to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab. Inside the house, blood spatter stained the furniture and the surrounding floor. Forensic scientist Nick Stalkey reconstructed the fatal scenario.
The stains that were on the front of this chest of drawers were 2 to 6 millimeters in size. Those are indicative of stains that you would see at a beating or a stabbing.
He stretched pieces of string back from the blood spatter to determine the position of the victim at the moment of the attack.
By the point of convergence of the bloodstains, I was able to determine that Mr. Harmachek was beaten just in front of this chest of drawers. We did find a hammer that was in the area of these bloodstains.
The chest of drawers and the hammer were sent to the crime lab for analysis. A La Crosse police officer spoke with Shirley Otto, the victim's longtime companion.
So right now you can't think of anybody that would want to do any harm to him?
She and Donald Harmachek had been together for over 20 years. She told the officer they had a good relationship, that Donald was well-liked, and everyone called him by his nickname, Pops. Shirley also told the officer that Donald had been upset recently because his house had been repeatedly burglarized.
I think he kept most of it there because he didn't trust banks.
La Crosse police detectives Joe Dunham and Brad Berkey looked into police reports and arrest records involving burglaries of the Harmachek residence. They found no shortage of names. It appeared perpetrators considered Donald Harmachek an easy mark.
He was someone that we knew kept money in his residence, and he had been targeted in the past by various burglars.
Police went to question a known local petty thief named Adam Tallbridge. But when he heard the police, he ran. Tallbridge looked like a promising suspect.
What is this all about? Apparently running for a reason.
Back at the station, he denied any involvement with the Harmasic homicide. Tallbridge claimed he panicked when he heard the police. That is why he ran. He agreed to cooperate and allowed his tennis shoes to be tested. They were sent out for analysis to the state crime lab, where forensic scientist Jerry Kotajarvi was analyzing the footprint casts from the crime scene.
There are a lot of shoes that have the same size and tread design, but it's the unique characteristics that identifies that shoe to that impression. Like cuts and missing pieces and wear and so on.
He determined that the footwear worn at the scene was an Airwalk tennis shoe, the same type worn by Tallbridge. But when he compared the casts to the sneakers, he found the shoes were the wrong size. Adam Tallbridge was not their man. Then Kotajarvi discovered something unusual. There were actually two separate and distinct shoe prints, one on top of the other. He concluded they were now looking for two suspects, not one. Detective Berkey realized they had to rethink their investigation.
Detective and Dunham and I both believed that there might be more to this. I mean, that information pointed us in the right direction.
Investigators still had no idea who killed Donald Harmasic, and they faced an even greater challenge. They were now looking for two suspects, and their hope was that the newly discovered shoe prints would lead them straight to the killers. 64-year-old Donald Harmasic was murdered and his house set on fire to cover up the crime. Investigators discovered they were now searching for two suspects, but so far the crime scene yielded a limited number of clues, and detectives Brad Berkey and Joe Dunham were frustrated.
When you burn a body, you take a lot of evidence with it, and also when you burn the home, you take a lot of evidence there. It was a challenge. We had a big challenge ahead of us because we had no suspects in this brutal murder.
At the crime lab, forensic scientists continued their investigation. Nick Stolke studied the victim's blood-spattered cabinet. Soot marks and spatter indicated that one of the drawers was partially open at the time of the murder. The chest of drawers provided Nick Stolke with important information.
The individual was beaten just in front of this chest of drawers, and then the drawers were repositioned, and then the fire started. It told us then that not only did the individuals beat the victim, but they also then ransacked that house after he was down and bleeding, and then started the fire and left.
Investigators now believe the perpetrator set the fire with the intent to cover up an even greater crime. At the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, forensic scientist Ken Olson tested debris from the burned house. He believed a flammable liquid was used to start the blaze.
It's very difficult to just take materials that are present to start a fire, but with an ignitable liquid, you can accelerate that fire and get it going faster.
Liquid accelerants leave traces behind that slowly evaporate. The debris collected was placed inside a can along with a carbon strip. Carbon absorbs any traces of the accelerant left behind. The can is sealed and then heated to 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
I then take that paint can with the charcoal strip inside, place it into the oven.
After heating for 16 hours, the carbon strip is then put into a gas chromatograph that analyzes the chemical components of the accelerant.
I take that vial and put it on the instrument, and it's automated, injects the solvent into the instrument, and I'm looking for any known accelerants that are there.
Every chemical has a unique molecular fingerprint. The chromatograph reveals that molecular structure.
I examined the residues that I recovered and found the residues of gasoline in 3 of the samples that were collected from the scene.
Investigators turned to the community, and they set up a crime solvers tip line. The leads began to pour in. One of the callers claimed a man named Todd Carpenter knew something about the murder. Detectives brought Carpenter in for questioning. He began to spell out his involvement, telling investigators he was contacted by 2 men.
He was approached by Nathan Lindell and Josh Lindell, and that he was a driver and they were just going there for a burglary.
According to Carpenter, the Lindell brothers heard a rumor that Donald Harmasic kept lots of cash in his house, and they wanted it. The brothers offered Carpenter money to drive the getaway car. Carpenter told the detectives he stayed with the car while Nathaniel and Josh Lindell committed the burglary.
He waited outside while Josh and Nathan Lindell went inside the residence looking for money and rummaged around the basement and went upstairs looking for money. And at that time, they stumbled across Donald Harmachek.
Afterwards, the brothers instructed him to drive to the top of Granddad Bluff, a secluded spot overlooking the city of La Crosse. There, they built a fire and burned the clothes they had been wearing, including their shoes. Carpenter was surprised when Nathaniel told him the man inside the house was, quote, toast by now.
What's he doing? Tell him to come on, let's get out of here.
The brothers paid Carpenter his money. In total, they had stolen $300 from Harmasic. Carpenter said he got nervous when he heard about the murder on the news the next day. Detectives ran the Lindell brothers' names through the computer. Josh Lindell's record was clean, but Nathaniel had a rap sheet riddled with prior arrests, including burglary.
Okay, Marcus.
Investigators began to believe Carpenter, but they had no concrete evidence to back up his story. In the hopes of getting some, detectives convinced him to wear a wire. Maybe they could catch Nathaniel incriminating himself. Carpenter went to see Nathaniel.
Hey, Marcus, man, what's up? What's going on, man?
He told him the police were asking a lot of questions.
Hey, calm down. Hey, come in quick.
He said he was scared. He didn't know what to do or say.
No?
They've just been coming by my work, asking me all kinds of questions, about who I was with and who I hang
Nathaniel played it cool. He indicated knowledge of the crime, but said nothing that could actually incriminate himself.
He was telling him to stay cool and just, don't tell him anything, and that those SOBs, they ain't gonna get nothing out of me.
They were convinced Nathaniel Lindell was the mastermind. But the wired conversation was no proof. Since Carpenter couldn't help them anymore, detectives hoped Josh Lindell could.
He did agree to speak with us, and that surprised me. His initial statement to us, he took the blame.
Detectives finally got the break they needed. But the extreme violence of the crime and their strongest piece of evidence, the shoe prints, pointed to 2 killers. Detectives knew they needed more if they were to catch them both. La Crosse, Wisconsin detectives were deep in the middle of the arson murder investigation of 64-year-old Donald Harmasic. The footprints found in the snow led investigators to 2 suspects. the Lindell brothers. Detectives Joe Dunham and Brad Berkey had placed Josh Lindell in custody. Although he claimed he acted alone, the detectives knew differently. Detective Brad Berkey hoped Josh would give up his brother.
I believed that he was involved, but I never expected him in the interview to tell us that he was the one that did this. I fully expected him to tell us that his brother was more involved than he was, and that surprised me. He was remorseful that he did this, felt bad about it, and he was trying to make some amends by telling us what he did.
Although Josh was taking the blame, in order to prove their case, detectives needed him to reveal his brother's involvement. Josh appeared nervous. He said he had never been in trouble with the law. And after hours of questioning, Josh Lindell finally admitted the whole story. He said he and Nathaniel broke in through the basement window, stepping on each other's footprints to obscure their tracks and to throw off police.
So we're gonna look for those.
They found Donald Harmasic asleep on the couch and panicked.
I was scared. It scared me, and I panicked and I hit him over the head.
Are you willing to speak with us in regard to this?
He said his brother Nathan also repeatedly struck the victim in the head with a hammer and left him for dead.
What's your present address?
Then they set the house on fire to cover up their crime. Josh's story matched Todd Carpenter's.
Exactly. Tell him to come on. Let's go.
He said they drove up to the bluff so he and his brother could burn their clothes and destroy evidence. Murder was never part of the plan. Although by the time they left, the plan had fallen apart.
Yeah, we weren't sure. I thought maybe
After Josh's confession, investigators had what they needed to bring in Nathaniel for breaking and entering, arson, and the murder of Donald Harmasic. They arrested him at the apartment he shared with his roommate.
And place you in the squad car after he searches you. When we get down to the police station, then we'll discuss
He was
this
handcuffed
at that time.
and taken to the police station where he was booked. Detectives also came armed with a search warrant. They questioned Nathaniel's roommate and searched for evidence. Even though Josh said they burned the shoes they wore, investigators collected another pair at his apartment. At the State Crime Lab, the shoes confiscated from Nathaniel were determined to be Airwalks, the same style and tread design of the shoe print cast. Although not an exact match, the wear pattern was uniquely similar to those worn at the crime scene. Despite the evidence against him and the fact that both Todd Carpenter and his own brother Josh incriminated him, Nathaniel Lindell refused to talk.
He would not speak to us. That's his right, of course. But Nathan is cold-hearted, would do anything.
Based on the evidence, police determined that Nathaniel and Josh Lindell broke into Donald Harmasic's home, intending to burglarize it. Josh was surprised to find the homeowner asleep on the sofa. Harmasic began to stir. Josh panicked. Nathaniel then struck him with the hammer he'd used to break the basement window, beating him unconscious. On their way out, the brothers took the money from the victim's wallet. They set the house on fire to cover up the murder. They then carefully stepped in each other's footprints, hoping to fool the authorities. It didn't turn out that way.
I believe Josh was definitely part of the crime, but he was not the leader of the group. It was Nathan Lindell, his older brother, that was the leader.
On February 3rd, 1998, Nathaniel Lindell was convicted of first-degree murder, burglary, and arson. He was sentenced to life in prison, he will be eligible for parole in 50 years. His brother, Josh Lindell, was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life. He will be eligible for parole in 25 years. In exchange for his testimony, Todd Carpenter was not charged. La Crosse homicide detectives narrowed in on one piece of forensic evidence, yielding 2 suspects who used arson to hide their crime. In Florida, authorities faced an ever-widening challenge as a string of similar fires became more than a coincidence. In the early morning of August 7, 1993, in Spring Hill, Florida, the Hernando County Fire Department responded to a burning residence. Firefighters raced to the home of 80-year-old Becky Saunders. When they arrived, the flames had already ravaged a large portion of the house. The extreme heat was overwhelming, and the entrances were blocked. But the firefighters did all they could to rescue the elderly resident and salvage her home. It took hours, but the firefighters finally got the fire under control. Forensic specialist Gary Kimball investigated.
Due to the extensive nature of the fire, we ran into some problems. We were unable to examine a lot of the things that we would like to have examined because they just weren't there anymore.
The heat was so intense, any potential evidence was destroyed. Investigators were unable to identify an immediate cause. Firefighters could not save Becky Saunders, an elderly widow who lived alone. She died at the scene. Police interviewed Becky Saunders' neighbor. He told investigators she didn't smoke, but she often fell asleep with the TV and lights on. He mentioned a possible electrical problem. The house had been struck by lightning a month or 2 earlier. Perhaps it had caused some damage that led to the fire. All the neighbors knew Becky and were eager to talk about her. They said she was in good health and quite independent. Fire investigators asked if anyone saw anything unusual. No one did. The Hernando County Sheriff's Arson Unit, led by Detective Mike Owens, searched for answers. When they could not determine the fire's immediate cause, they needed to consider another possibility: arson.
Arson investigation is not an exact science. It's a big puzzle. You try to take charred remains and then put them back together. We take everything in the room out and try to reproduce the locations of the furniture, everything and anything that was in there, and try and see where you're having low burns, high burns, to see what area the fire actually traveled.
The debris collected from the house was sent to the lab for analysis. Arson expert Carl Chasteen looked for pore patterns or the residue of a flammable chemical, an accelerant, that would indicate arson.
What we're trying to determine is, has there been something added to this fire scene that would cause it to burn faster and hotter than it would if it were an accidental fire? That's what we're looking for. We're looking to see if there's been an accelerant added to the fire.
The photographs revealed the progression of the fire, which started in the bedroom. Investigators still needed to find out the cause of the fire. But with so much of the evidence destroyed, they knew it would not be easy.
In a crime laboratory, we have to be objective. It's not our job to convict somebody or exonerate anyone. It's our job to test the evidence and tell the truth. In this case, we looked at it as closely as we could, and we still could not determine that there was any ignitable liquid in the samples.
At the medical examiner's office, the victim's remains were autopsied. Though her blood showed elevated levels of carbon monoxide, indicating that she had inhaled smoke, Dr. Valerie Rao wasn't confident that it was enough to suffocate her. The poor condition of her remains made further analysis impossible.
Because the investigation really did not lead anywhere, it was decided by the medical examiner to call it undetermined.
Without any evidence to indicate otherwise, Becky Saunders' death remained a mystery. Investigators were left with unanswered questions. The firefighters in Hernando County would soon find themselves battling another blaze. But maybe this could provide some answers. An elderly Spring Hill, Florida resident, Becky Saunders, died trapped inside her burning house. Investigators were unable to determine the actual cause of the fire.
Fire rescue, what is your emergency?
10 days later, the Hernando County dispatcher received a call. Another house was on fire, and an elderly couple was trapped inside.
They'll be right there.
Firefighters entered the smoke-filled house and saw a woman collapsed on the floor. They carefully carried her to safety. A man was trapped unconscious in the back of the house.
I've got a second victim.
The victims, Mr. and Mrs. Ted Burton, were an elderly couple in poor health. They were rushed to the hospital. Forensic supervisor Russ Knodel investigated.
Someone had broken into the home, had beaten the elderly lady. Her husband in the bedroom heard the commotion, came out. He was beaten, and then they attempted to set a drape on fire and left.
Investigators noticed a bystander engrossed by the rescue. Because entry was forced and the victims were beaten, detectives questioned everyone in the area, including the bystander. His name was Brian Searsley. He said he lived in the neighborhood and that he'd seen nothing suspicious. He agreed to let investigators swab his hands for the telltale signs of an accelerant. He also allowed them to take an article of clothing for further testing. The fire had gone out only moments after it had started. The arson dog was sent in, and investigators collected debris to test for accelerants. If an accelerant was used, detectives believed it might point them in the direction of a suspect.
There was some alcohol poured in a dish with a candle. The candle was lit and then put underneath the drapes, and the drapes caught on fire.
The rest of the house remained undamaged. It was searched thoroughly, looking for anything out of the ordinary. In the bathroom, investigators noticed a cabinet door open. Not sure what it could mean, the cabinet was dusted for prints. At the State Arson Lab, Brian Searsley's clothes, as well as the swabs and samples from the Burton house, were analyzed. Traces of gasoline were found on his clothes, but there was no evidence of gasoline at the crime scene. He was eliminated as a suspect. Police studied crime scene photographs, hoping to spot something they'd missed. Mrs. Burton suffered from Alzheimer's, and Mr. Burton had lapsed into a coma, so the couple was unable to aid investigators. They found no evidence that the similarities between the Burton fire and the Saunders fire was anything more than coincidence.
Right off the edge of the carport. Now, we know it wasn't a robbery, because as we were going through the home, we opened up the drawer in the bedroom, and that's a picture of the drawer opened up in the bedroom. And if you'll notice, you can start to see a wallet, a man's wallet. When we picked up the wallet and opened it up, it had a lot of cash in it, so we know it wasn't a robbery.
With no known motive and no possible suspects, the evidence baffled investigators. Later that day, another fire was reported in a neighboring town.
Signal 4 radio. You have fire on the scene now.
We received a call that there was a fire up in Brookridge. Again, the fire was hot and it had burnt severely to where everything in the bedroom had dropped onto the ground. We processed that scene looking for anything we could find.
Like the first victim, 70-year-old Monique Jenkins had been found burned beyond recognition on her bed. And like the last fire, a bathroom cabinet stood open. Once again, most of the evidence was destroyed. But investigators collected what they could from the smoldering debris. The body was burned beyond recognition. At autopsy, the medical examiner was unable to find the cause of death. The examiners did find the victim's hands were bound with duct tape, rendering her helpless. Examiners found no fingerprints on the tape. Again, there was no clear motive for the crime.
The detectives approach us and they're looking for anything they can find that will forensically link something or someone to these cases. They're wanting to know if we got fingerprints. They're wanting to know if we got any trace evidence, if we found any accelerants, or anything that they can put their hands on to help them in the direction they're going in this case. And at this particular time, we were not able to come up with anything. Very frustrating for the whole team.
Okay, folks, we're here today to review the facts that we've come up with thus far.
Detectives compared evidence gathered at the three fires, hoping to come up with something that would tie them together.
We had a great amount of intense heat inside this master bedroom.
It appears to be some type of a home invasion at this point when both the victims were...
The intensity of the blaze indicated an accelerant was used to cover up another crime.
Once we examined the remains, it clearly showed that she had been duct taped with her hands clearly duct taped behind her back. So that's really the first indication that we're dealing with something other than accidental fires.
This was the crucial piece of evidence that began to link the arsons.
Because now we know we had a problem. We felt now we have somebody going around breaking in homes and burning these elderly women up.
Police followed through on several leads. None paid off. Worried, a man checked on his neighbor, Rita Talbot, after he hadn't seen her for a few days. Her front porch was littered with unread newspapers. She didn't answer the door. With the key she had given him, the neighbor entered the house.
Hello? Hello?
He found her in the bedroom, dead. Once again, police were called. They were all too familiar with this neighborhood. In fact, Rita Talbot lived on the same block as Becky Saunders, the first fire victim.
Scott? Hey, Russ.
What do we got going?
Looks like another one. I haven't been in the scene yet, but we have, we're doing some processing out on the side of the house. Got an open window, looks like it could be our point of entry. And
but this crime scene was different. The house did not catch fire. Detective Mike Owens noticed the stains around the bed.
What we've got is, looks like a pour pattern, Scott. Looks like we've got some alcohol bottles up there on the bed.
And what they may have done, or might have been done here, is alcohol poured in the carpet, and not enough with this carpet to substantiate a burn, but it melted all the carpet down. Look at this pattern. Look how deep it is.
How about the bed? Did the bed get anything?
Looking at the bed, if you look over here, we don't have
The crime scene technicians dusted for fingerprints. This time, they found one. The print was lifted and sent to the lab for analysis. They collected samples of the carpet, hoping the fibers would yield clues. Cigarette butts and some empty alcohol bottles were recovered. After weeks of frustration, this tragic crime scene produced several key clues. Now, detectives hoped the forensic evidence would bring them closer to capturing the killer. For almost 2 months, detectives had been tracking a killer who was wreaking havoc on a peaceful Florida neighborhood. At the most recent crime scene, police found several clues, including a fingerprint they hoped would lead them to a suspect. Detective Scott Bierweiler believed the recovery of this evidence was crucial.
The past houses of the victims, of the deceased, had been burned. A lot of the evidence had been destroyed. We were not real successful in obtaining evidence. So we were all encouraged going into this house, knowing that it was most likely going to be tied with the other victims, same suspect in this. And if we were going to obtain any type of evidence, our best shot was to get it out of this particular house.
Fingerprints were also lifted from a vehicle parked in the latest victim's garage. At autopsy, it was revealed there were marks left by the duct tape used to tie her hands behind her back. She had been strangled. All but 2 of her ribs were broken and her neck was snapped. They also determined she was sexually assaulted. Inside her throat, the medical examiner found a single hair. As detectives gathered their evidence, news of the murder spread. Detective Tom Holly received an anonymous tip.
While I was finishing up my paperwork, I was working late last night, and I got this anonymous phone call from a female who tried to disguise her voice and kind of only whispered. But she said she knew who the killer was from Spring Hill, and she gave me the name of Edwin Caat.
So we should have some good quality prints to compare with those of that, what is his name, Caat, you said?
Caat.
It's going to hinge on forensics at this point.
Forensic specialist Gary Kimball compared the prints recovered at the crime scene with those on file. Detectives learned Caat had a long history of arrests.
Well, he does have a criminal history. He's a convicted felon out of Hillsborough County. And 91, we have a homicide, willful kill, first degree, robbery, and forgery from Tampa PD. And
they also learned Caat performed odd jobs for several of the victims. One detective remembered interviewing him at the first crime scene. Kimball believed he was onto something. Forensic supervisor Russ Knodel examined the findings, looking for certain characteristics, such as identical loops and patterns. They were eager to share the news.
Guys, we got some good news. Gary Kimball just made 2 of your late cases off Caat case. Caat is your man. He's the guy.
But since Caat was a local handyman and worked for several of the victims, his prints could be easily explained.
And one off the car in the garage.
They needed more.
Wonderful. He's your man.
That's great. Scratch too.
For 2 weeks, Caat was placed under 24-hour surveillance. Their goal was to collect more physical evidence. After he left a local bar, detectives took one of Caat's cigarette butts, hoping to match his DNA to the saliva on the cigarettes recovered at the crime scene, and to the hair found lodged in the victim's throat. The DNA matched. It was the connection they needed. Detectives obtained an arrest warrant and went to the suspect's most recent residence. Michael Caat was placed under arrest for the most recent arson murder of Rita Talbot. In a room lined with photos of the crime scenes and the many files police had collected, detectives questioned Caat.
Prior to even interviewing, we knew that he was our guy, so we pushed forward with it. And Detective Douglas and myself kind of took on the good guy, bad guy detective.
At first, he denied everything. But when confronted with the evidence, he confessed.
Once we started our interview, we couldn't shut him up, basically. He just talked on and on and on and on.
During the 3-hour interview, he confessed to murders of 3 women, as well as the 4 arsons. Caat was charged with 3 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 3 counts of rape.
The forensics evidence clinches the case for us, but there's nothing like a confession.
According to his confession, Michael Caat chose elderly victims because he believed they were vulnerable. He broke into their homes and crept into their rooms. He would restrain his victims with duct tape, then proceed to rape and beat them. He poured rubbing alcohol that he took from their own bathrooms, spilling it on and around their beds. He then lit a match. For his crimes, Michael Caat was sentenced to death. On April 19, 1995, he was killed by another death row inmate. Fire can be used as a powerful weapon. Killers who choose it know little is left in its wake.
Hey guys, how we doing?
Though some hope it will successfully hide their crimes, many perpetrators discover forensic evidence can survive long after the fire is out. And their trial by fire leads directly to justice. Every woman's fear becomes all too real for one Southern California woman when an office party takes a violent turn. Investigators must sort out conflicting accounts, unlocking the one clue that turns out to be the key to the truth. In a Portland, Oregon suburb, a 2-year-old toddler is found dead in his bed. His death is ruled accidental, but one investigator remains unconvinced. Using forensic experiments, she is able to reveal the answer that otherwise would be hidden. Solving crimes may begin with intuition, but applied science provides investigators with irrefutable proof. When criminals go to great lengths to mask their crimes, investigators must step up to the challenge and remain undaunted. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. The city of Long Beach, California is on the cutting edge of the hottest trends and the hippest night spots. But sometimes the lure of the glittering lights and living life on the fast track leads to danger. 4 a.m. on a warm July night in 1999, Patricia White staggered from an apartment.
Patricia.
She was both disheveled and disoriented.
Just come back in, okay?
She was wearing her business suit and a t-shirt that wasn't hers. A man named Lorenzo Fial frantically tried to get her to come back into his apartment. but she wasn't coming back. She was desperately trying to call 911.
Long Beach Police.
Hello? Hello?
Hello, ma'am?
I need help. I don't know where I am. Hello?
When she finally got through to the Long Beach Police Dispatch, she was confused and dazed and unable to tell police where she was or how she got there.
Okay, what happened to you, ma'am?
I don't know.
Sorry, party, clear call.
10-4 en route. The dispatcher sent a team of officers to the scene. The dispatcher kept her on the phone, hoping she'd recognize landmarks that might be a clue to her whereabouts.
Okay, can you see him?
Yeah, they're getting out.
Okay, go ahead and talk to him.
Hold on.
When the officers approached, they immediately sensed that Patricia was not acting right.
Can I talk to you for a minute?
She was frightened and completely disoriented.
You okay?
Patricia told him that she woke up in a strange apartment and wasn't wearing any clothes. She remembered leaving a restaurant the night before, but then she blacked out and didn't know how she got to this location.
I thought it was water and it was really salty.
The officers suspected she was under the influence of either alcohol or drugs.
Do you live here?
No.
Okay, have you been drinking anything?
Patricia said she had had 2 drinks nearly 6 hours earlier.
Just a couple of small drinks?
Lorenzo Fial came down to talk to the officers.
I don't know.
Do you know him?
As a precaution, they checked him for weapons. He was not armed. He told them that Patricia was his girlfriend, and they had been out the night before.
Are you guys out drinking tonight, having a good time? Yeah,
He said she was very drunk, so he brought her back to his apartment, where she passed out in his bed. He told them that they had not had sex that night.
Who's he?
Patricia told police that she and Fial worked together, and that in fact he was her boss.
Did you guys have sex or
She was still too confused to provide any further details. The officers, concerned about her state of mind and her lack of memory, decided to take her downtown to test her for alcohol.
Hey, how long have you lived here? Almost 4 years.
Because of the conflicting stories and the fact that Patricia said she didn't remember anything and woke up naked in a strange bed, police asked Fial to accompany them to the police station to make a statement and provide blood samples. He cooperated fully. After taking a breathalyzer test at the police station, Patricia was taken to the hospital. Her blood alcohol level was a .01, 8 times below the legal limit. While Patricia had no memory of a sexual encounter, under the circumstances, police were suspicious. She was sent to the sexual assault examination room for further testing.
Patricia didn't really tell me too much.
One of the responding officers gave the details to Long Beach detective Catherine Kriskovic, a member of the sexual assault unit.
And then she doesn't remember anything after that. Eventually, when I got her to calm down, she told me that she remembers getting in the car.
Did she appear to be under the influence?
She appeared to be under the influence.
Detective Kriskovic grew more suspicious when she learned that Patricia said she was given an opened drink.
And she pointed out to you guys the apartment where she was given a drink of what she said tasted like a very salty substance when she had initially asked for water. And she spit it out and again asked for water, took a gulp from the water bottle, and again it tasted salty, but she in fact swallowed this gulp. She does not remember anything after that point until she woke up naked in a bed. This all indicated to me, with my training and experience, that this possibly could be GHB.
GHB, or gamma-hydroxybutyrate, is commonly known as a date rape drug. It has been on the scene in California since the 1980s. GHB is a fluffy white substance resembling powder. When mixed with water, it dissolves and is unnoticeable. The drug usually takes effect in as little as 15 minutes, leaving a victim comatose or unable to move, blanking out their memory for up to 4 to 6 hours.
as much as you can.
GHB is completely undetectable in the system after 12 hours. Detective Kriskovic and sexual assault nurse examiner Melinda Waddell had to move fast. They looked for further physical evidence of the effects of this powerful substance.
Get you some fresh air, and get you something to drink. At the time that I was speaking to her, she was still in a state of confusion, at times a little disoriented. She was very cooperative and wanting to help, even though she was having a very hard time with the fact that she couldn't remember certain things, and was taking it hard in the sense that she wouldn't be able to provide us information to assist us with our investigation.
Detective Kriskovic urged Patricia to try and piece together what had happened in Fial's apartment.
I woke up in a room, in a bed, and I didn't have any clothes on. I was naked.
She remembered waking up in a strange bed. Fial was there without his shirt on. Embarrassed that she had no clothes on, she told him to leave. He told her she didn't need to be upset, and that a minute ago she had a different attitude.
I've seen you naked.
And I didn't know where I
This only frightened Patricia further. Still dazed, Patricia found a t-shirt that wasn't hers, and eventually located the business suit she had worn the night before.
See, I was calling. I couldn't get through.
She collected her belongings and left. She then called 911. Nurse Melinda Waddell.
Yeah, but
you can't always judge what type of emotional state any person's going to be in after an attack or an episode like this. Patricia White was shaking, she was tearful, she was confused about what happened to her. I need you to get a urine sample first.
Nurse Waddell began a forensic examination. She asked for a urine sample. This would determine if GHB was in her system. The sample would be sent to the lab to check for the substance. She then conducted a full-body examination. She asked Patricia to remove her clothing.
As we're collecting evidence, we have no idea what the significance of any piece of evidence is going to be until later in the investigation. And at the same time, the forensic nurse will examine her entire body, and we're looking for scratches, bruises, bite marks, anything in her hair, anywhere on her clothing, any piece of evidence that could help put the story together of what happened to her. After we examine her entire body, we also use a special lamp called a Woods lamp, and that's an ultraviolet light. Then we scan her body. If there's any dried secretions or substances on her body that will fluoresce positive, we can see it with this light, and then we collect a sample. And we did have a positive sample on Patricia. Samples?
Melinda Waddell discovered dried semen on Patricia's body. Vaginal and anal swabs also indicated the presence of seminal fluid.
First thing I'm going to do, Patricia, is just take a look.
She proceeded with a pelvic exam using a colposcope, a microscope fitted with a 35mm camera so that pictures can be taken of the internal tissue.
In Patricia's case, we found some abrasions on her cervix. Normally, the cervix does not have any type of injury or abrasions on it, even with their story of non-consensual intercourse. It's very difficult to cause any type of self-inflicted injury on the face of the cervix. So it's a significant finding when we do see it.
During consensual sex, most women's bodies experience a natural arousal response,
Samples just from the
making it
outside.
difficult to injure the cervix during intercourse. The bruising on Patricia's cervix indicated she was not a willing participant. Internal abrasions and hemorrhaging also indicated forcible sodomy.
The conclusion that we can draw whenever we find an abrasion or a tear or a bruise that there was some type of injury created, and that's from blunt force trauma. We can't say what caused that injury, but that something was inserted and created an injury. We also can't really testify to the fact whether it was consensual or non-consensual unless the injury was severe, and then we could say that was extremely painful. And who would consent to that type of force?
The hours of speculation ended.
Medications that we've talked about, some antibiotics.
Nurse Melinda Waddell concluded Patricia White was raped.
Tablet that I already gave you. I'm gonna take these.
Patricia's worst fears were now confirmed, and she was determined to find out how and why it happened. After a long night of questions, Long Beach investigators had at least one answer. Patricia White had been raped. She remembered little more than waking up naked in her boss, Lorenzo Fial's bed.
Anybody answering?
Because she blacked out and couldn't remember how she got there, Detective Catherine Kriskovic suspected she was given the date rape drug, GHB. While she awaited the toxicology findings, Detective Kriskovic wanted to hear Fial's version of events.
Really like it. This is one of Chevy's newer blonde.
An officer went to the car dealership where he worked as the sales manager.
Come have a seat if you like.
Can you tell me what happened yesterday with Miss White?
Oh.
The officer asked Fial about the events of the evening.
After we got off work.
Right.
We're just gonna celebrate. We had a lot of food. We had about 15.
He said that it was his birthday, and they had gone out to celebrate at a restaurant. Patricia had parked her car at a friend's house and rode to the restaurant with some other co-workers. Fial said that it was quite a party, with lots of food and liquor. He said that Patricia drank too much and was acting a little crazy. She was definitely coming on to Fial.
Oh, I need two.
She had way more to drink than she normally does, so...
Fial claimed she was so drunk, he offered to drive.
Instead of have her drive, I thought we...
This information matched his earlier statement. But then, his story changed.
That was one of the weird things about her.
He admitted that he actually did sleep with Patricia, but said that it was consensual.
Just kind of woke up.
Worried about losing his job and trying to keep their relationship a secret was the reason he lied to police.
Caused her to dial 911 or call the police?
He claimed they had been seeing each other for a couple of months
I have no idea.
and had had sex on more than one occasion.
And just started yelling.
Detective Kriskovic contacted several of the people who attended the party that night.
This is Detective Catherine Kriskovic with Long Beach Police
All of them
Department,
corroborated
and I'm
Fial's
calling in
story.
regards to a situation that I'm involved in.
They said that Patricia was drunk and came on to him.
A cocktail, okay.
The case was shaping up to be Patricia White's word against Lorenzo Fial's. Detective Kriskovic looked up Fial's record. She discovered that he had 3 prior convictions for robbery, cocaine possession, and spousal abuse. That proved nothing. Though he had a criminal past, he wasn't necessarily a rapist. But someone was clearly lying. Detective Kriskovic hoped the forensic lab would determine who was telling the truth. Patricia's urine samples were sent to the LA County Coroner's Office. Supervising criminalist Dan Anderson was assigned the case.
Detective Kriskovic contacted me directly to analyze this particular urine sample from what they called a credible rape victim. Because we are the coroner's office and we deal principally with postmortem samples, we don't routinely do antemortem or live people's urines or blood samples. Because we were the only lab in the area that could do a GHB analysis at that particular time, I said that they could bring it on over and we'd be willing to help them out.
Anderson proceeded with the GHB testing. He obtained 2 urine samples. He needed to compare the original sample from the morning of the assault to one from several days later to act as a control sample. The control sample would tell him how much GHB was normal in Patricia's body.
GHB, or gamma hydroxybutyrate, is a natural substance in your body. As a toxicologist, you normally won't see it, or you will see it at very, very low levels. So if someone actually took the GHB, it'd be a large amount either in the blood or urine sample.
Both of the urine samples are individually combined with chemicals that separate the GHB from the specimens. The isolated GHB samples are then placed in a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, or GCMS. There, it converts them into a gas and measures the levels of GHB in each specimen. Patricia's normal GHB level was 1 microgram per milliliter. Yet, the sample taken the morning of the alleged assault showed 424 micrograms per milliliter. Patricia White had a large amount of GHB in her system. Detective Kriskovic spoke with Patricia again to tell her what Fial had said about their relationship.
But I want to ask you again.
Patricia was stunned when she heard that Fial had said that they were dating and had been intimate before. She said she had known Fial for nearly 7 years, but claimed they never had a sexual relationship. Patricia White talks about that night.
So I didn't know him. It was a working relationship. He was my boss. He was in control of the dealership, and he was in control of my paychecks. So that's how I knew him.
Ready? Come on.
Again, her story contradicted what Fial had said.
I was the most sober out of everybody, so I was the one driving, because I had only 2 drinks.
I told him, the only way that I would go with him is if I would drive.
And once you arrived at the liquor store, what happened?
They went over the events of that night once again.
To drink and came out.
She said Fial had stopped to get some vodka. Patricia asked if he'd get her a bottle of water.
He gave me the water, and it was horrible tasting. And then within like 5 minutes of that, very short distance, that I don't have any memory at all.
Patricia White's memory was hazy. She was still confused about exactly what happened that night. But what she did know was she had been raped, and large amounts of GHB were found in her system.
Even that's fuzzy. I don't remember.
How it got there was a mystery. And the one person who might provide answers was the last person to see her before she passed out. And that was Lorenzo Fial. Long Beach detective Catherine Kriskovic was trying to sort out exactly what happened to Patricia White the night she was assaulted.
It was very salty and...
Patricia had been raped, and large amounts of an illegal substance, GHB, a date rape drug, was found in her system. Her last memory was of her boss, Lorenzo Fial, offering her a drink of water that tasted oddly salty.
Salty.
Don't pour it out, just drink it.
She then woke up several hours later, naked in his bed.
What happened yesterday?
Lorenzo Fial says the two were involved in a consensual sexual relationship. But Patricia White's internal injuries told a different story.
Well, she's sitting in my lap.
Forensic examiners compared the semen samples found inside Patricia White's body to DNA samples taken from Lorenzo Fial earlier in the investigation. They matched. Detective Kriskovic had enough evidence to make an arrest. Lorenzo Fial was arrested and charged with 6 felony counts. including kidnapping, rape with the use of drugs, and sodomy with the use of drugs. Kriskovic obtained a search warrant for Fial's personal property. If he could be linked to the GHB, they'd have an open and shut case.
I then started to write a search warrant in order for us to go out to the different locations, their residence as well as their workplace, in an attempt to possibly locate any of the water bottles or anything maybe inside the residence which would indicate that they might have made it at their home or work location.
During a search of his car, they recovered some water bottles and sent them to the lab for further analysis. The lab conducted tests to determine if the water was tainted with GHB. The results were inconclusive. This did not deter Detective Kriskovic.
This is Detective Kriskovic.
With the positive urine test for GHB, Nurse Melinda Waddell's findings, and the testimony of the victim, she felt that the district attorney had a strong case. Long Beach Deputy DA Christopher Frisco agreed, but he knew it would be far from easy.
Whenever you have a situation where the victim and the defendant know each other, this almost always lends itself to a defense of consent, especially when the defendant's DNA was recovered from her in the form of semen. I mean, if it's really his word against her word, then how do you know it's not consensual?
Frisco questioned Patricia further and prepared her for the trial. He knew the defense would try to discredit her testimony, but he was so confident she was a credible witness, he encouraged her to take the stand. It paid off. The jury also believed Patricia.
Patricia testified that she was driving the vehicle that she was in with Lorenzo Fial. He had given her a liquid that was clear. She drank it. It tasted much like ocean water. She spit it out. The defense was never able to explain how Patricia White got GHB in her body. They were never able to explain how it was that Patricia White could accurately describe the feeling of being under the influence of GHB and the taste of GHB as tasting salty.
I think when I woke up the next morning.
Based on the evidence, investigators pieced together what they believe happened that evening.
I was nauseous.
After the party, Fial went to the liquor store to buy some vodka and a bottle of water for Patricia. He then laced the water with GHB and offered it to Patricia.
I asked for my water, and I took a big drink of it because I was really thirsty. And it just tasted so bad that I spit most of it out.
No, it's salty.
Don't pour it out. Just drink it. Here. Let me switch. I'm going to drive.
And then my next memory is being in a bed with him throwing back the covers on the bed and me being naked and not being able to move and not being able to see past like a foot and a half.
On March 27, 2000, Lorenzo Fial was convicted of 4 counts of rape and sodomy with a drug and sentenced to 11 years in prison. He never admitted to any wrongdoing.
No regrets, no remorse, no nothing, no admission of nothing. He actually said to me that it's only 3 of us that know what actually happened. There's him, I, and God would make me pay for this.
Today, Patricia White works with the Rape Crisis Center in Long Beach, helping to educate law enforcement agencies and schools about the dangers of GHB. The determination of forensic investigators to search for the truth resulted in justice for Patricia White. But when Oregon authorities are confronted with a child's mysterious death, they discover that the answers they seek depend on asking the right questions. Coquille is located in coastal Oregon and sits beneath the Three Sisters mountain range along the Coquille River, an ideal place to bring up a child. On September 1st, 1999, Denise Carter and her live-in boyfriend, Stacy Brown, celebrated Denise's birthday over breakfast. Around 9:15, Denise noticed her 2.5-year-old son, Mikey, had not awakened. Concerned, she asked Stacy to check in on the toddler. He discovered the boy lying motionless on the bed, and he would not wake up. Sensing something was terribly wrong, Stacy alerted Denise.
Trust me, something's not right.
The baby was not breathing.
911, what is your emergency?
A dispatcher took the call and immediately sent an ambulance.
How old?
Within minutes, paramedics and officers from the Coquille Police Department raced to Denise's home. Denise rushed them into the child's room. But Mikey was already dead. Denise and Stacy were devastated.
Side for just a minute, please.
Yeah.
The circumstances surrounding Mikey's death raised suspicions.
We can go someplace else.
Assistant Deputy Medical Examiner Chris Carter was called to the scene to investigate.
I'm so sorry. What's going on?
Denise and Stacy said Mikey was fine the night before, and neither of them noticed anything unusual. Denise had turned in early. Stacy had stayed up with Mikey. He said that when he put the child to bed, he was fine. Carter decided to look through the house in search of an explanation as to why Mikey had died. The forensic team was already gathering evidence at the location. As Carter entered Mikey's room, she began to notice something unusual. The child's bed was relatively undisturbed.
The one thing that you did notice was the way he was laying, and several of the detectives, as the morning progressed, would look at him and say he looks staged. It looks like, you know, somebody's laid him there and positioned him, and it looked staged. Another detective on scene thought that the diaper just wasn't right. It wasn't wrinkled enough, or I can remember thinking that at the time. That's not the way my 2.5-year-old slept when he was 2.5. You know, he would have been all over the bed.
Carter also noticed that the bathtub had a small amount of water in it. Wet towels lay on the floor. Crime technicians from the Oregon State Police Lab took samples of some red stains found on the child's bed. They conducted a presumptive blood test. The results were negative.
I just want to wait for these people to get out of here.
Once Carter was satisfied she had fully investigated the home, she asked Stacy and Denise a few additional questions.
He was trying to comfort her. She was crying. When I asked the two of them what they thought might have happened to Mikey, Stacy Brown told me that he probably choked on something.
I think he choked.
Stacy claimed Mikey would put anything he could get his hands on in his mouth.
I pulled a rubber band out of his mouth yesterday, and
I know that we'll have
To Chris Karcher, there were still too many unanswered questions.
I was concerned that a 2.5-year-old was dead, and we didn't have any reason for him to be dead. You're always suspicious at that point. He had no health problems. He had not been injured in the days before. He had eaten well the night before. He had gone to bed like normal the night before. And so there was no reason for him to be dead.
The child's body was transported to Bay Area Hospital for autopsy. Chris Karcher assisted. Initially, the autopsy did not reveal anything out of the ordinary.
Is there any hemorrhages in the soft tissue?
Yet when they examined the child's airway, they discovered a foreign object lodged in his throat.
The autopsy was basically unremarkable until we got to his airway, and then we found a cellophane that was from a cigarette wrapper that had been inhaled real tightly down in his airway.
Cause of death was asphyxiation. And although water was found in his lungs, forensic examiners thought it was due to the asphyxiation. Yet something still bothered Chris Karcher. She noticed that the printed tax stamp was still intact on the cigarette wrapper. The baby's saliva had not dissolved the image. This, coupled with the other evidence, left too many clues unanswered. Investigator Karcher was determined to find out why this baby died. In Coquille, Oregon, a seemingly healthy 2.5-year-old Mikey Carter was found dead in his bed. Assistant Deputy Medical Examiner Chris Karcher had discovered a cellophane cigarette wrapper lodged in his throat. It was determined that the cause of death was asphyxiation. But to Chris Karcher, something about the evidence at the crime scene and the cigarette wrapper itself did not add up. She decided to perform a simple experiment. She placed a cellophane wrapper from an identical pack of cigarettes in an ordinary glass of drinking water.
One of the things that I started thinking about was how pristine that stamp was on the bottom of that cellophane, and I got to wondering if a child was chewing on that, how well would the stamp stay on? And so I decided, well, you know, let's try and see what it would take to get that stamp off.
When Karcher returned to the beaker of water, she found that the stamp remained intact. The findings troubled her for days.
So I thought, well, that would not represent what saliva might do to a stamp. That there surely must be enzymes and such in saliva, and that would be the best way to determine. So I then put cellophane in my mouth and kept it in my mouth on a short drive one day, about a half hour.
When she got back to her office, she examined the wrapper.
And when I took it out of my mouth, the stamp was almost gone. All that told me at the time was that it wasn't in his mouth very long. What few places on the piece of cellophane that I had between my teeth, it poked holes in the cellophane. And what had come from Mikey's throat had no holes in it. The cellophane was all intact, as well as the stamp.
Karcher recalled that Stacy Brown had said the little boy was curious and was always stuffing things in his mouth and chewing on them. Yet there were no bite marks on the cellophane. At the Children's Advocacy Center, Chris Karcher reviewed the case with the Coos County Child Fatality Review Team. Over the next several days, a team of investigators continued to pore over the facts. Detectives Vaughn Edsel of the North Bend Police Department and Pete Lichty of the Coos County Sheriff's Office joined the investigation.
Unanswered questions that we need to look into.
The first step was to obviously go over the existing material with a fine-tooth comb, try to identify any inconsistencies or any other questions that remained unanswered. At the same time we were doing that, a profile was being put together on Mr. Brown and Mrs. Carter and the immediate family, so we could have a roadmap on how to proceed with the investigation.
Detective Edsel asked Stacy and Denise to come down to the station to write out what they remembered about the night Mikey died. When Stacy finished his statement, he was eager to leave and wanted to know why Denise was taking so long.
When I first met Stacy Brown, my initial observations of him were that he was very guarded and very cautious. The more time I spent with Mr. Brown, the more he became agitated and the more he became defensive and very guarded.
Denise appeared more cooperative, and her statement was a detailed 11 pages. After finishing their statements, Stacy became angry with Denise. He was nervous, almost paranoid about what she had written in her statement. Detective Lichty remembered Stacy's volatile behavior.
Mr. Brown finished relatively quickly in comparison to Mrs. Carter. It took him quite a bit of time to produce those 2 1/4 pages because he was giving it quite a bit of thought. I noticed that he was thinking quite a bit about what he was writing, whereas Mrs. Carter was just writing pretty much free thought, which was encouraging for us because we thought it would reveal some details.
Detectives Lichty and Edsel reviewed the written statements and found inconsistencies. They then ran background checks on both. Stacy Brown's report indicated a long history of violence.
Detective Edsel, take a look at this.
Brown also had a record of alcohol and drug-related offenses.
Menacing here.
What do you think?
I think we should contact his probation officer.
Okay.
Let's go.
They dug deeper into his criminal past.
I learned that he was currently on probation and actually for menacing a former girlfriend of his, where the encounter had evolved into a pretty violent ending where Mr. Brown refused to leave the relationship.
How long ago was that?
The probation officer also confirmed that Stacy had a drug problem, specifically with methamphetamine and marijuana.
Appears to have a short fuse.
Investigators would not let up and met often to go over the case. They went over everything, looking for anything they might have missed.
Well, there is one thing that I'm not sure how important it is, but there was standing water that I noticed in the bathtub.
One crime scene photo particularly disturbed Chris Carter. It was of the bathtub and a small amount of water. Carter wasn't sure what it meant, but the evidence did not square with Denise and Stacy's testimony. Denise had said that no one had taken a bath or shower the evening before. Investigators now knew they weren't getting the whole story. Detectives Lichty and Edsel decided to ask Stacy and Denise to take lie detector tests. They agreed. But on the day the test was to be administered, Denise showed up and told them Stacy had changed his mind.
I don't know. Then last night he started screaming at me about coming in today. He didn't want me to come in.
Yet shortly thereafter, Stacy showed up at the front desk.
I need to talk to my wife.
He had changed his mind again and now agreed to do the polygraph after all.
Detective Lichty?
Excuse me. Yes.
Mr. Brown is here.
Denise took the test first.
Will you honestly answer the questions about Mikey's death?
Yes.
The polygraph results on Mrs. Carter proved that she was answering her questions truthfully. The reverse was true for Mr. Brown.
Did you put that cigarette cellophane wrapper into Mikey's throat? No. Are you worried?
Stacy not only appeared
we haven't
agitated,
discussed?
his involuntary response picked up on the lie detector test revealed deception. Stacy became so upset after the test, he created a scene at the police headquarters.
I really got to see my wife now. Now.
During this time, Mr. Brown was outside in the lobby waiting for Mrs. Carter and started to create a scene. He started becoming agitated. He started to become angry. And he was actually escorted by uniformed officers outside the building because of his aggressive behavior.
Detective Lichty told Denise privately that Stacy had not done well on the polygraph test.
That has occurred.
Denise was stunned and angry.
And we have some concerns about your safety as far as you going home with him this evening.
Because of Stacy's erratic behavior, he suggested she go to the Women's Crisis Center.
We were concerned that something would happen that evening. So we encouraged Mrs. Carter to stay at the Coos Bay Police Department until we could make arrangements with the Coos County Women's Crisis Center and have her placed in a safe home until she felt comfortable in returning or making other suitable arrangements. She declined.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mark.
Shortly after Denise left,
Pete Lichty.
Lichty received a disturbing call.
Is Mrs. Carter okay?
The pressure of the investigation had pushed Stacy Brown too far. He had threatened and assaulted Denise. He was arrested for domestic menacing. And having been convicted for domestic abuse before, he was all too familiar with the procedure. It appeared that Stacy Brown was not the devoted family man he professed to be the night of Mikey's death. And perhaps he knew more than he was letting on. If he did, investigators were almost certain to find out. In Oregon, the Coos County Sheriff's Office was investigating the death of 2.5-year-old Mikey Carter, who appeared to have choked to death on a cellophane cigarette wrapper. But authorities were beginning to suspect the child's death was not an accident. Mikey's mother, Denise, and her boyfriend, Stacy Brown, were the only other people in the house at the time of the incident.
104, 125.
Stacy Brown's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic, and it culminated in his arrest for domestic menacing. The day after he was picked up, Detectives Lichty and Edsel visited Denise at the library where she worked.
Mrs. Carter, excuse me.
She was visibly shaken. And now that Stacy was safely in police custody, she wanted to get something off her chest.
Can we sit?
Sure. Did you have an affair with
She told
your
them that a few months earlier, her ex-husband had spent the night at her house on Stacy's birthday.
Brought it up a lot. He was very
Stacy had found out about the affair. He had discovered some of her ex-husband's personal belongings at Denise's house.
Hey.
Hey.
When Stacy confronted her with them, she told him he had stopped by.
What would his cigarettes be doing in,
But then she confessed the affair.
on my birthday?
Stacy became violent when he learned they had been together on his birthday.
Mrs. Carter told us that this particular issue was a consistent reminder to Mr. Brown that she had been unfaithful to him. Mr. Brown consistently barraged her with accusations and usually ending that with, "How could you have done this on my birthday of all days?"
Mikey Carter was found dead on Denise's birthday. The detectives now had motive. It appeared that Stacy wanted to get even for her affair, and he did it on her birthday. Detectives confronted Stacy Brown with Denise's story. On a hunch, they asked him about the unexplained water in the bathtub.
Detective Lichty asked Mr. Brown about the standing water in the tub. Mr. Brown had a pretty dramatic reversal of what had been reported. Mr. Brown suggested that if there were water in Mikey's lungs, he could account for the presence of that water. Now, up to this point, There had been no indication that Mikey was anywhere near water during the time before his death.
I put him.
Finally, Stacy confessed to murdering 2.5-year-old Mikey Carter.
And he
He told them that he had given Mikey a bath.
Mike?
Enraged by Denise's infidelity, he tried to drown the child. Unsuccessful in his first attempt, he carried the child back to his bed, where he jammed the cellophane wrapper down his throat, cutting off his airway.
Mr. Brown admitted that while Mikey was still breathing, he removed a piece of cellophane from the cigarette pack and inserted it into Mikey's throat to make it appear that Mikey had choked.
Inside, I knew that he had done this. I just knew he had. And I guess at this point, I just am thrilled that we went ahead and did it, and that Detective Etzel and Detective Lichty did such a dynamite job.
Stacy Brown was convicted of first-degree murder and received 25 years to life. As long as criminals try to hide their crimes, investigators will work to expose them. Though perpetrators believe they have covered their tracks, forensic scientists continue to develop new techniques and use their instincts to bring the guilty to justice.